I talk for a second?
Excursion into
Coaching. All right, here we are talking about coaching. Literally, that's what we're doing. That's what we've been doing. And today I'm excited to have the opportunity to do a little deep dive into existential career coaching, the intersection of existential philosophy. And it became so much more relevant given the nauseating speed of development in the world, and especially around AI automation and what it does to people. And so much of traditional career coaching has this existential undertone now. And I think we've both recognized it. And after a couple of hours of conversation, we realized we should amplify this voice. I've always, since I've met you, since we started talking about 5 minutes, and I'm like, this is a voice that deserves amplification, because you come with a lot of experience in helping people navigating careers, but also you've been teaching existentialism and existential themes. I would have loved to be a student in your class from the sounds of it. And so it just really felt right to capture some of this. Because I think not just career coaches, but anybody who's a lot of this audience is going to be coaches. So I think they need to know where people are going to take the conversation when they talk about their careers. Mm-hmm. They might have to completely reinvent themselves. And, themes like authenticity, identity, and isolation, freedom, choice, meaning, absurdity. I mean, these are prevalent themes. And your focus on working with experience and underlying themes just... every time it gets me to smile. And so here we are talking about coaching.
Here we are. Yes. It's good to be with you today, Yannick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, who are you? I mean, I gave a little bit of a context, but I wonder if you wanted to sketch out any of this, maybe talk a little bit about where you're coming from in terms of your work with careers and what got you to recognize the existential themes underneath. Was there a chicken and an egg to this, or how did it all come about?
Yeah, a little bit. So I'm Britt-Mari Sykes, and I'm Canadian, based in Ottawa. I work with clients across the country. So I've been working online with clients long before the pandemic, but it gives me a wonderful opportunity to have conversations with people in different parts of the country and really hear what they're experiencing. And yes, you're right. I do come from a very heavy academic background in existential psychology, and I've taught courses in existential psychology. And I've always been interested, even, years ago with undergrads, how they were entering the world and what they were going to experience and how they were going to carve out a place to contribute, but also to shape, what that contribution is, what kind of opportunities they would have, what they would have access to, where they would find challenges and barriers. And I wasn't really thinking about the whole concept of career counseling, but that's exactly what was brewing in my head as I'm teaching, history of psychology, history of existential psychological theory, and looking out at these young people and going, what kind of world are you going into, and what kind of world will you be shaping, but also what kind of opportunities are out there for you. So that just kind of started. And it, honestly, I can't think of a particular turning point. It just kind of evolved. And so I started working with individual clients, and its foundation is an existential perspective or approach to career counseling that allows my clients to do that deeper dive, to go way beyond strategy or simply, matching skills to a job, or a formulaic approach to feeding the job market. But what is our experience of work and career? It's not one thing, and it really can't be strategically mapped out because, again, speaking existentially, we're always moving and changing and sensing the world and responding to the world and shaping the world. And as you mentioned, the choices and decisions that we make, and all of that is at play in the relationship that we build, are exposed to, influenced by that relationship with work and career. I find it really interesting. And I think my clients have found it really interesting to be able to explore these things deeper. So, yes, of course, we talk about the meaning of work and career and the shifting meaning, because again, it's not one thing. There are shifting meanings throughout the course of our lives and how we experience work. But as you mentioned, identity, choices, decisions, how we respond to change, how we respond to the movement in our career lives, the attitudes that we bring to work and career, how we are personally influenced by work, the work that we do, but also how we bring it to life. We're sort of obsessed with, jobs or a job posting or the requirements and responsibilities of a job, but the person, the human being brings a role to life. And we don't often give space to talk about that, or to allow, if we're in conversation with a client, to actually pose that question: how do you bring this role to life? And if we ask somebody, what are the responsibilities of your job, people will give you a shopping list of, usually very generic vocabulary on, I'm required to do this, or the job requires this, or, I'm a multitasker and, a good communicator, whatnot. But if you ask somebody, how do you work? How do you bring your role to life? It usually stumps people. It stumps me.
Very different kind of question.
Very different question. It stumps
Mm-hmm.
me as well as everybody else, but it generates some really interesting conversation, and it pushes you to start thinking, oh yeah, wait a minute, there's all sorts of things going on in our relationship with work and career, as there is in every area of our lives. But obviously today you and I are talking specifically about the world of work. But I find it infinitely fascinating, and I think it does deserve, especially considering how much is changing in the world, considering, changes to the job market, economies, again, going back to access, barriers, challenges. Obviously, you mentioned too AI. I think it's really important to have these very human conversations, and to encourage our clients to really think about who they are in this relationship with work and career, as opposed to just a skill set, a generic skill set, or yeah, sort of an entity that fills the job market, as opposed to the person who kind of lives and breathes these things and, integrates the meaning of work into, a whole host of areas of their lives, who and reflects on this. And again, you and I have, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but you and I have also talked previously about what I call sort of the atrophying, I'm not sure that's a word, but the atrophying of our reflective muscles. And again, given the changes that are taking place in the world, how much we need to amplify, to use your expression, to amplify um, the the exercise, the regular exercising of our reflective muscles.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's so
Long
many doors
introduction.
already open. This is great.
Introduction that was.
Um, I think where I would like to kind of start with this, we talked about this more traditional career counseling, and it seems like you've always had this existential lens onto the work. And to you and I, these questions about how do you experience yourself at work, what's your relationship with it, these existential questions that open a different kind of conversation. That often creates the right foundation to have, a conversation to build, not just a career, but a path that you can authentically walk and navigate and own and be proud of. To us, these questions come naturally. To a lot of career counselors, career coaches, they don't seem to come naturally. So I wonder, maybe we can offer a little bit of that, maybe not comparison, but so people get a sense for what a career counselor would maybe traditionally do, and then maybe we can move into how we can open more of these existential doors. Because as you said earlier, I think, I think many people, career coaches would say, no, there absolutely is a methodology, and there's absolutely is a system, and there is a structure of how you can guide someone to a better career. There's all of these career coaching tools, and there's all of these, series of questions and interventions and inquiry and assessment tools, and there's CV models, and like you can do a lot in that space that actually offers real value to someone.
Absolutely.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about what kind of the traditional approach is, what you notice in the field, and then we can move into why is this existential stuff important, and what kind of questions we can ask to open it up.
Everything you mentioned, Yannick, is important, and it's not dismissed. Again, depending on the career counselor or career coach, depending on the client, depending on the work that you're doing with that client, none of this gets rid of the practical steps or practical application. But the person, as you mentioned, navigating, the person has to navigate their lives and their career lives beyond sessions with a counselor or a coach. And, from my perspective, I think giving them some of this deeper foundation actually gives more to those practical steps. And going forward, it allows the client to think differently about those practical steps, to ask different questions, to do different kinds of research when they have moments of transition or change or struggle or stuckness. And so my hope is that, entering into these sort of existential conversations from the beginning and pairing that, or you could even say entering into these more reflective conversations and then pairing that with practical steps that are relevant to that particular client, and those practical steps actually become more relevant because they're chosen with more intention. Given that reflective foundation, the client now has different kinds of information that they're working with. They've got a different vocabulary, not one that I've provided, but because they've really been working those reflective muscles and really asking some of these deeper existential questions. They too are coming up with a new vocabulary, new thoughts, new ideas, new reflections, and that too is bringing a different perspective to the practical steps that we still have a choice over, because again, it's got to be relevant in a whole host of, because a job isn't a job, but professions aren't identical, given the stage of life that a client is in. There's a whole series of practical steps that may or may not be relevant. And then of course you've got the person who may or may not be motivated, or, may or may not want to take up those practical steps. However, and again, I'm not suggesting that, this is a, answer to everything, but equipping a client with, again, more depth, more thought, more reflection, more ideas, being able to tap into, because they're asking different questions, tap into how they're experiencing something or understanding why they're resistant to change. I mean, you can offer a client, let me digress for a moment. You can offer a client, a strategy to handle or execute change. But if that client is resistant to change because of experiences that they've had with change,
I
the
feel there's a story there. Is there a real client or like somebody you
I've
can
had many,
anonymize, or
I've
could you
had
tell us a story of how
I've
that
had
might play
many
out?
clients who are quite reluctant, are quite resistant to change, and it could be, and I'm just giving some very broad examples. It could be a change in professional identity that they don't want to let go of. So perhaps the change has been forced on them. It's not a chosen change. Perhaps the job or profession something has phased out, and they're suddenly confronted with change. Perhaps the change is too quick, and they may be a person that requires just a different pace of processing and questioning, or maybe just pushing back at the change. And so you've got to work with that. As I mentioned, it might be an identity that's shift, and there might be incredible resistance, even if the person accepts the reality. This job has been phased out. It's not coming back. I accept that reality. What I can't accept is the change in identity and how people will see me. And I'm not ready to face that. You have to work with that. So I can't say, well, here's a strategy, that's going to help you follow these 5 steps, and this is going to help you move into that change. If I'm dealing with someone or conversing with someone who's very resistant to the change, and I'm understanding what that resistance is, that's the point to stay with the conversation. You're
Yeah, all
working.
the pragmatic stuff comes much later, because if the
Absolutely.
foundation is not in place, none of it is going to work.
Absolutely.
And
So if you give space for that foundation, if you explore that foundation, suddenly you're looking at practical steps. In fact, you're looking at them more creatively. What's relevant to you at this moment? What can you do? Are there still some resistances? Let's talk about them. Are there things that you could start doing? What are they? Let's talk about those. What would they look like within the context of your day to day? So again, you're reworking the practical steps. You're not, and again, you're not getting rid of um, practical approaches. You're not getting rid of, analyzing the job market, understanding, trends that are happening. It's not throwing that out, but it's not giving that a primary spot right from the beginning,
well,
because
it's layering it upon the foundation of
layering.
understanding who you are, what you want, how you experience this. And then what I'm hearing is all these tools, all these exercises, or all these interventions that are used more traditionally, they still have value. They just need to be layered on top of doing the,
Absolutely.
let's call it existential work for now.
Absolutely. And they come later. They come later, and they will change. They won't be, if we take them as they are and use them, as your first step, um, you know, there isn't a lot of room to customize them to the client. But this layering is really important, and I often use that phrase myself.
All right.
Yeah, the layering, it's very important. The client can also feel that layering through conversations. They start seeing the layering, and they start molding that layering to fit who they are, and again, what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And I will say, it's easy because language is limited, and it's easy for us to talk about deeper self-awareness, or knowing yourself, and yes, that is a layer, but there's also the layer, and maybe I'm splitting hairs, but there's also the layer of, again, what we're experiencing and understanding that experiencing. And again, it's not experience, it's not static, but really coming to an understanding of what we're experiencing on a continuous, continuous evolving basis. So in some ways, it's even deeper than just self-awareness, or getting to know yourself, or understanding your likes and dislikes. It's deeper than that. What is my relationship and experience with the world, with having a place in the world, of contributing or being blocked to contribute, or experiencing barriers to not only contribute but also to sustain my life? There's some pretty big questions in there. Yeah. And they may not, that may not be the basis of a conversation. You wouldn't just come out and say, but it gets woven into the conversation. You're making space for those kinds of conversations,
Yeah,
kinds of inquiries.
that's where I would love to go next, right? Like, what are some of those signs for you that maybe a different conversation wants to be had first? You mentioned that, or if there's some resistance, for example, that might be a sign. Like, how else do you intuit or tell that maybe you need to ask some different kind of questions here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's also difficult because I immediately focus on your word, intuit, which, again, is hard to formulate. It's hard to, it's hard to capture a formula. I'm usually just deeply listening, and I'm listening for some kind of opening where the client is not. And again, I'm going to say something that's just very broad, but I'm listening deeply for something that goes beyond, what's the, like, how do I do this? Or what's the strategy for this? Or what, tell me how to do something. It's a deep listening where the client is offering something just a little more, and you just, whatever that is,
Yeah,
you
to
you
notice things that
you
are like
pull
on the
that.
periphery.
Yeah, you just pull on that thread, and it could be anything. It could be, I'm exhausted, I'm so bored, I'm frightened.
Hmm.
I mean, it doesn't
And
have to
these are all
necessarily.
experiences.
Yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
that's where the phenomenological practice is
yeah,
going in strong, because you notice or you get curious about an experience that this client is having, and you ask them about it.
yes,
And if once somebody's starting to describe their experience, which is, can feel a bit alien in the more traditional career coaching context, where somebody comes for, pragmatic action steps towards figuring out what the next career move is, or how to get a different job.
mhm.
Um, but like, when you invite somebody into that and they're willing to go with you, or to go with themselves rather, then through that exploration of the experience, lots of these doors open.
Absolutely, absolutely. A very simple example, and again, something that you and I have talked about previously. I hear the word stuck a lot. That's almost like the opening statement. I'm so stuck. I feel so stuck. And even asking, what does stuck feel like for you? It sounds very, very simple. The answer is never simple, or
Yeah.
what comes back from the client is never simple, but that can be just a kind of obvious thread to pull on.
Yeah.
But then you get a
What do you
person
do just
you
on
get a
this example,
personal
right?
story. Sorry.
One, when somebody says stuck, sometimes we ask, what does stuck feel like to you? But they stay at that kind of quite cognitive level. It's like, well, I just, I can't move, or it's like, and then they start talking about the market, and like they're kind of getting out there again, away from their own experience to, rationalizing what stuckness is. What do you do when somebody kind of deflects from the actual exploration of their experience, consciously or unconsciously, right? Or maybe they just don't have the language for it. How do you invite them back into the experience?
Yeah, no, again, a great question, and hard for me to find the language around what I specifically do, um, because I know I'm doing it very naturally and intuitively, and it might just be a very gentle recognition out, saying out loud that that's a great description of what's happening around you. Um, what are you just going back to, what are you experiencing? What are you feeling? Can you give me an example of that stuck recently, where that word, came to your mind? What was happening? What was going on? Or maybe you just go back to, what has changed? When did have you not felt stuck in this particular role that you're in? Have you not felt stuck? What did that feel like? What was happening? What was the context that you did not feel stuck? So again, it's hard for me to find, a specific formula for how I approach that, because, as you know, when you're active in the deep listening, and you're very present with someone, someone that you don't know that well, you are listening, responding. The conversation is very organic. But I'm sure in all of that, I'm recognizing where there is some deflection, where there's simply a description of what's happening, and where you can sort of very gently, come back. As I said, I gave again a simple example of, have you always felt stuck in this role? Or, have, you know, give me some idea of the different feelings that you've had towards this role. When did you start noticing, and apply that word stuck? What seemed to be going on? And often people are actually quite willing, like, again, when you say that it's okay to go into that space, people are quite willing to go into that space. Sometimes in career counseling, clients are reticent because they think, "Oh, is this therapy? Am I moving into therapy? We should be talking about the job." And it's like, yep, you are.
You are the job.
You are the job. You're bringing that job to life. You're engaged with that job. That job has meaning or it doesn't have meaning. Your engagement with that job has an impact on your life and what you're experiencing. And that is worth conversation, and it's a worthy layer. And, again, you continue the conversations, and the client starts seeing the layering, and
Yeah, I
and, and
remember.
that's what ultimately, that's what you want, because then the client takes away those layers, and takes
Mm.
away, the initial kind of exercise program in layering, and hopefully they can duplicate that as they go on in their lives. And as I said previously, to bring a different perspective, to their experiences, to ask different questions, to allow themselves to go, beyond what are the functional tasks of this job, or, which are important, or the job as providing security and stability, which is extremely important. Of course it is. But there's also the person who is continuously living, moving, reacting, engaging with, shaping, reshaping, resisting, pushing back against. I mean, this is going on all the time. And, my hope is with these conversations that clients actually start to see, that it's never one thing or another, like, yes, in this moment, in this day, I'm resistant to this change. I'm resistant to what happened in this meeting. I can feel it. I realize I'm coming into this day with a certain attitude, and it is informing everything I've done or I'm doing today. These are really important layers.
And I think it requires this willingness to engage more in a relational way of working with people rather than a pragmatic, methodological way. And this space of deep listening, you start noticing things that might not be so in the words. I remember my very first coach at some point, it was early in our work. I remember the room we were in. I was teaching at a school back then, and I had like found a classroom, and he had visited me at the school. So he asked me a question, and I said a bunch of things, and at some point he like paused and he kind of leaned back and he looked at me in a interesting way, and he's like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of, somehow this sounds like a story. Or it, like, the vibe was like, I hear the words but I don't quite believe it, and it felt really challenging. At first I kind of justified myself and this and that, but like I because we were in relationship, I started reflecting and I realized, oh, this was actually something that I think I was trying to convince myself of. And so he had listened to all the words made perfect sense, right? But there was something in how he perceived it that just gave pause and a curiosity, and a reflection from how he had experienced me as I was telling the story. And it was really helpful to get me to reflect on a whole nother level. And I think this is one of those ways in which we can open some doors that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been opened, because it would have been easy to just continue with the story. And I'm sure the story would have led somewhere interesting. And I'm sure there's action steps in it, but it's how do we open those, an invitation to experience is, I think, a go-to way for existential coaches, particularly because of the rooting in phenomenology. But I'm wondering what are some other questions you might ask somebody, or that you have asked someone in the past, so that maybe career coaches without an existential lens who are interested in this work get a bit more of a flavor of like, ooh, what kind of questions might I have not ever thought about, but they're very much related to helping somebody understand their experience as they navigate careers.
I'm trying to think of some examples. Usually when I'm writing, I can come up with all sorts of reflective questions. It's always easier when I'm writing. Again, I'm repeating myself, but some of the obvious ones are, what are you currently experiencing? Or how would you describe your relationship with work and career at this stage? At this stage in your life, again, depending on the words that they have used, if I may, Yannick, I mean, you said something interesting about stories, and it immediately made me think of, work and career is an interesting space because it does come with sort of all these narratives, what a career should look like, what a successful career is. I mean, of course we can disagree with it, but there are these huge narratives out there? What is a successful career? What should a career, look like? Or what should a meaningful career be? Or the sort of awful phrase I've never liked is, you should be passionate about what you're doing. And clients come in with that. They come in with those narratives, and that can also be a good place to ask questions. Like, I
Existentialists love challenging dogma, and when there is a
absolutely.
story at play that sounds dogmatic or being installed somewhere, it's so helpful to explore what the roots of those stories and narratives are and what you're carrying with you.
Absolutely. So if you hear a client saying should, I should be this further along in my career. I mean, that's a great space to, again, find your own personal questions, but the should is fascinating. Tell me more about I should be further along, as opposed to it just being a statement. I mean, the statement is important, but it's an opening. It's an opening. So take that opportunity, and open yourself to exploring, not resisting, but exploring. Tell me more about should. If someone says, everybody else is so passionate about what they do. I'm not. Even injecting some humor. Is everybody passionate about what they do? I mean, inject some humor to say, why don't we talk about that? That's a very pervasive narrative,
Yeah.
in the world of work and career. And the client might say, you're right. I mean, you hear it everywhere. Exactly. How do we respond to it? How do we internalize that? And then what's happening? How are we framing our experiences of work and career around this massive narrative that we should all be passionate about what we're doing? So again, depending
What's
on
your
the,
issue with passion?
no, gosh, that's a long topic. I don't have an issue with passion, but the idea that we should all be passionate, find a career you're passionate about and you'll never work another day in your life, sort of all these I think they're sort of trivial statements. I think it puts a lot of pressure on people to experience their career lives a certain way. That's what I mean by, again, depending on the client, depending on the conversation, depending on where you are in the moment, you can poke some fun. Again, depends on the client, but you can poke some fun at that larger narrative. And if someone says, for example, oh, everybody seems to be passionate about what they're doing and I'm not, as I said before, is everyone? But I find it very limiting. It assumes that a career life is also experienced the same way throughout the course of your life, and it's simply not. So the idea that you're going to sustain some kind of, like, again, what is the passion? Um, it doesn't it doesn't open to deeper conversation of how do I experience passion. It's never one thing, but it's presented as though it's one thing. You've got to find it and all will be well. Well, that's not the reality.
makes
That's just
makes me
not
think of
the reality.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes me think of romantic relationships and how we also have these narratives of how they're
Yes.
supposed to be. But I think in romantic relationships, like we all understand that this goes going through phases, and it's probably not gonna feel like the experience of being in a relationship for the first 3 months. It's probably not gonna be the experience after 30 years,
Hmm. No,
and
exactly. Yeah. And if we're not challenging that, I've often seen younger people, people in their 20s who use that phrase, I've got to find something that I'm passionate about. Like that's really how you're supposed to, you know, that's how your career life is supposed to be developed and formed, is finding something you're passionate about. And what I see is what I call passion paralysis, because it means you're not really engaging and exploring and discovering, and and in that engagement and curiosity and trying different things, you realize you discover all sorts of things that you're passionate about or that are fulfilling, that it isn't one thing, it doesn't have one definition. And you realize, oh, okay, I've engaged in sort of different work experiences, and I've come to recognize, a particular team that I was on was really fulfilling. Being on that team, being a member of that team was really fulfilling. That was a really great experience. Or, I recognize that, at that moment in my life, with all the various contexts, excuse me, in my life, all the various things that I'm experiencing, I noticed in myself how engaged I was. And it really felt like, oh, that, I'm really passionate about that. But when you make it a blanket statement and you say, this is what your career life should look like. And also, who does that serve? That also bothers me. There are a lot of people in the world where, you know, discovering a career they're passionate about is not an option. It's not an option for a variety of reasons. How do they internalize what I think is a really trivial statement? How do they internalize that? And again, it doesn't allow us to look more broadly at how we experience our life. There are going to be moments in our career lives that are tedious, boring, challenging. We're going to have barriers at certain times in our lives. At other times, there are going to be a lot of opportunity. We're going to experience work differently at different stages of our lives. If we stay engaged and curious and asking questions and reflecting on how we're experiencing, all these things that we're engaged in, we discover different things that are fulfilling or passionate, and they have context. To say that, find a job you're passionate about and you'll never work again, it's a contextless, it's a, it has no context. It has no context. It has no reality in someone's life that is continuously moving, evolving, changing, shifting. And we have different definitions of what passion is. So I'm not adverse to the word. I'm adverse to its use as sort of a blanket statement. That's how, that's what our careers, again, should look like. And this is just not the reality. And again, it assumes, again, you could go in all directions with that statement, but it also assumes that you have one job for life and that you're going to be continuously passionate about it. And the reality is, most people, certainly going forward, most people will have multiple careers in a lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So again,
that's
how
also
are you? Yeah.
Yeah, is a job, is a career? Can there be multiple careers? Is a career the story of work for you, regardless in which kind of industry that leads to? So it's already super interesting to do what many existential coaches do and just inquire into the meaning of things. So what does your career mean to you, or what does the word career mean to you? It's similar about passion. Like I get I get with the sentiment, right? I get that when you're engaged and passionate and super interested, and when work is really meaningful, it doesn't quite feel like what many people attach to the work, to the word work as a narrative, which is like you have to force yourself and it's hard and it's like work can feel like it's really flowing, and sometimes it can feel effortless, and we're still laboring a lot,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
I get where that's coming from, but again,
Absolutely.
I think it's important we inquire into, well, what does passion mean to you, and what's the narrative behind it?
What does it mean to
So
you now? What does it mean to you now? Again, like give it more context. What does it mean now? Because I mean, we're going to answer differently at different stages in our lives based on the experiences that we've had. And I do think it's important also for us to recognize, um, again, sort of just the vastness of our experiences and be able to say, as I mentioned before, oh, that team, I was placed on a team for that project. That was really interesting. That was a really fulfilling experience. And to be able to name these within, again, within the context of our career trajectory. So again, whether that's, and the reality is nowadays, again, people do have multiple careers, but to be able to pinpoint, moments of challenge, moments of fulfillment, to be able to describe them. I always get clients to be very descriptive. What did that particular situation that you describe as fulfilling? I mean, describe it to me.
how does it show up? Yeah.
Yeah, describe it to me. I'm fascinated, or something that was challenging, or even in the course of a day, we can experience something that's deeply meaningful, and something that catches us off guard, and suddenly we're having to pivot and deal with something quite challenging. Um, Again, just going back to these sort of um, blanket statements or blanket narratives, they don't give much room. They don't allow much room
Yeah. And
to.
talking about those, sorry.
No, no, no. Just they don't give much room to not only go deeper, but to get very descriptive with, and to maybe just isolate so that we can become practiced. Isolate something that we experienced and that we labeled a certain way, and then go, yeah, but what was the experience? I need more vocabulary, more words. I need to look at this and not just label it as that was challenging, or that was fulfilling. Maybe suddenly the challenge becomes, I was scared to be given those responsibilities. I didn't want them. And I was tasked with them, and I could feel myself scared and resistant to it. And suddenly it became so challenging. So, there are lots of ways with, deep listening, deep interest, right? We have to be really, really interested in the people we're working with. Deep listening, deep interest.
Be really deeply interested, and you'll never work a day in your life again.
Yes, let's start a new phrase, and yeah, that could be absolutely, absolutely.
Another one of those kind of blankets is purpose or legacy, and it gets thrown around quite lightly, and often approached in a more of a, here's the story of what I'm supposed to feel or what I'm supposed to do. All of a sudden, everybody's career needs to be purposeful or needs to, serve a bigger contribution. When you mention the word serve, I always have our colleague Peter Hawkins in my ear, who
Mhm.
often asks, what does your work and your life, what or who does your work or your life serve? Right. So there's an emphasis on contribution and purpose and legacy, and meaning is in there. Right. So, but it gets thrown around quite lightly as well.
Absolutely,
And if it's engaged on
absolutely.
an experiential level, I think it's really helpful to open that kind of door,
Yeah,
especially when it comes to careers. But I
yeah.
wonder if you could talk a little bit about a purpose and how it shows up in your work.
Oh, I hear again something else I hear a lot. And I'm always, again, curious about what that individual means by the word, and what is happening? How are you experiencing? What is that relationship that you currently have with work and career where you are saying this doesn't, this has no purpose? So, tell me more. I'm really inviting people to be very, very descriptive. So again, what might come out is, um, you know, what I do has no value to the world. What I do is just repetitive junk. This is an example. And, I mean, that's fascinating. What I do has no value to the world. What I do is repetitive junk. And I'm just inviting that client again to go further with that. What would you consider valuable to the world? Again, at this moment, based on your experiences, based on your relationship with work and career, what would be valuable? Can you give me an example of something that you would feel valuable? I mean, again, that just opens up just
Right. Immediately talking about personal values.
immediately opens up. And, again, I encourage clients to be very, very descriptive. So we've left the word purpose and we've really brought it into the individual and how they're defining it and feeling it and experiencing. Or, yeah, and you're just thinking it's just repetitive junk. I might even, if I'm listening to that, and again, I feel very sort of, deeply connected to the person I'm having a conversation with. I know I've said out loud, what a fascinating phrase, repetitive junk. I might even say, oh, I'm writing that down. That's absolutely fascinating. Tell me more. Tell me more. What a fantastic phrase. Again, you're saying, yeah, I want to hear more about your experiences. I want to hear more about this phrasing. Help me better understand what you're experiencing. And, again, over a course of a number of conversations, I think very often clients start to see that, yeah, I can go further. I don't need to just rest on these words like purposeful. I need to go a bit deeper and say, well, yeah, what exactly is going on? And it's okay. It's okay to say something like this isn't a value to the world, and this is repetitive junk. Yeah, what? Tell me more.
And curious about what other themes you find. Like, love to name a couple of more. What particularly comes from the existential philosophy, and what you come across in career work. For example, one thing that strikes me is that this experience of stuckness. It feels like when you feel stuck in this day and age, it's like it's not lucky. It can be a terrible experience, but I keep talking to people who wish they could feel stuck in their job and do repetitive junk, but their industry has just
Yes.
evaporated, or
Mhm.
they were made redundant, or they can see how they're going to be made redundant very soon. There's no way that this couldn't happen, and they have to kind of renegotiate their what they do now, because it's not just about getting another job, but they need to really reorientate and sometimes start from the bottom of the food chain again, or figure out what do I have that's transferable. Like it can like feel like a real crisis, like they're in free fall, or they're like no longer grounded, no longer held by what used to give them purpose, which sometimes is the repetitive junk that grounds you.
Yeah. Or just
Um,
being
so
being held, which I think is a really interesting idea, because yeah, work and career sort of holds us in a place in the world that also provides a certain amount of security and stability. It's not guaranteed. It may not be enough security and stability, but it's interesting because we're held, and yet we can also feel stuck.
yeah, there's always the dark side to this.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Or stuck
so
can actually be a really interesting space to be in. For some people, even though they may not initially recognize it, stuck actually allows some space to slow the pace. Stuck can actually be quite useful. It may feel like a bit of it may feel like a crisis, or we feel like I shouldn't be stuck. My life should flow. I shouldn't, again,
stuck
the
could be a pause, right? And
stuck
pauses can be really helpful.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And I've had those kinds of conversations with clients where stuck can be looked at from another perspective, not something to fear or to get rid of as quickly as possible. What's the strategy to get rid of this stuck feeling? Because I should be flowing. I should be experiencing flow, and my career life should be moving along. But stuck can actually be incredibly informative. Like, I'm pondering something and I don't actually have an immediate answer for this. And that's okay. But sometimes we need acknowledgement. We need to be heard, seen, acknowledged, validated, supported, to actually see that stuck as maybe something really interesting. Really, really interesting. Obviously, you don't want to set up camp there. You don't want to stay there forever. But it can be informative, like, oh, this actually forces me to pause. This actually, is putting me in a space where I'm contemplating things that are contradictory. And I don't really like being in this space of having to entertain or hold these contradictory questions, thoughts, perplexing issues. But maybe this is okay for now. And if I actually do pause, and sometimes I've said maybe we can use this time together, whatever number of conversations we're having, to to pause and contemplate those things, and to look at the things that are paradoxical, contradictory, uncomfortable, and not label the stuck as something that needs to be immediately leapt over, or again, finding a strategy or a formula to get rid of the stuck. But actually, maybe this has a purpose, and maybe it does force us to slow down and just take a different pace, and look at things from a variety of angles. And maybe that's the purpose of this particular conversation that we're having. And then again, the client is, I'm not equipping the client with the reflections and the contemplations. They're doing that in the space that's been opened up by my suggesting, perhaps. But again, it depends on the client. It may not work for every client, but for some, there's suddenly almost like a relief. Ooh, that doesn't feel quite as bad when you frame it as it could be a valuable spot just to pause and
There's
think
an
and reflect. And we need that.
Yeah, there's an opportunity. I love this idea of looking at coaching, not just existential coaching, but a lot of coaching is an invitation to step back for a moment and kind of take a different view, slow down, and kind of check in who and what you are becoming, and what is this now, and how does it actually feel. And especially in the busy world of work, very often people don't have that kind of time, or they don't take that kind of time. My dad always used to
Yeah,
say, you don't have
yes,
time, you need to
yeah,
take time.
yeah. But it's both. I
But then
think
you can, yeah, no, then you can start to inquire about what is purpose here, and what is passion here, and what do I like to contribute to, and what options do I actually have, and challenge the narrative of I should or I need or I can't. And that notion of existential freedom that, when we talk about purpose, we talk about meaning, and we have the freedom to choose our own meaning. In fact, we have to choose our own meaning and our own purpose, unless we accept somebody else's narrative. But that I find that so valuable, and people have found that so valuable, that through this kind of conversations that have more of an existential lens, they can actually recognize that they have a lot more choice here than they otherwise would have recognized. More choice also means more anxiety, because more responsibility, and now it's up to you to make those
Yeah,
choices,
yeah,
and
of
it
course.
requires a certain bit of courage. But it is opening up more choices, and coaching essentially, I think, is a practice that opens up more choice for people and helps them to navigate, the aftermath of those choices.
hmm No, I agree. And again, I would add, and I know I've mentioned this several times, but just how important it is to encourage clients to be very descriptive in what they're experiencing, and not just to land on a word or a phrase. And sometimes, you know, we we live in a world, especially in the Western world, where the sort of business model of living has permeated everything. Sort of business model, or I should say, the business model has permeated just about every aspect of our living. And one of the outcomes of that is, ironing out contradiction, ironing out, a grappling with. And I find that, again, an existential perspective approach, an existential space, let's call it an existential space, really encourages, like, I'm here to be with you, to talk, to share, to listen, to hear, to acknowledge those contradictions that in many ways we're not, it's almost like we're not allowed to have, or we've got to figure them out. Like, you don't hold contradiction. And yet that's the reality of everyone's existence. And an existential perspective approach really does provide space to think about these things. And so there can be conversations without an agenda or a specific outcome, something that we're very uncomfortable with, especially in the sort of arena of coaching or career counseling. We're actually uncomfortable, not providing a session that has, a strict protocol and has a very specific outcome. So, some clients are not willing to do that, and others do see the value, and for them, the personal meaning in having that layer, go back to the layers, having that layer, building on that layer, and ultimately getting to a place where they start thinking pragmatically. But again, those practicalities are taking on a different life, and a different meaning and a different relevance, because they're imbued with so much. So it's really interesting. I'm again, this is you and I have talked about this, and my fascination with creating existential space, the existential gym.
Yes.
Yes, we need to make space for the existential gym, not as a cure-all, not at all, but just to put a highlight on how incredibly important, again, in a world that is so formulaic in many respects, and so obsessed with strategy and how-to guides. And we are, again, less and less, or our reflective muscles are used less and less. And it's such an important layering. It is not the answer. It is not the solution. It's an absolutely vital layering. And it also then allows us to look critically and creatively at the changes that are taking place and be able to actually have conversations about, and you and I have talked about this again, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to, what does work mean going forward? What will it mean? What will my relationship be? Again, without cultivating that existential space, or without cultivating the existential gym, as I like to call it, um, we won't have those very human muscles to be able to look at what we're experiencing in the world, to look at profound change, and again to weigh it and turn it upside down, and be okay with doing that as a layer, as opposed to saying that's a waste of time, that doesn't get you to the answer. No, it's actually it's a vital layering.
And it takes time, just like
And
in the gym, in the actual gym. So
and
how
like
did
the gym. Yes, like the gym. It takes
so
time. Exactly. Yeah.
so how do people get their reps in? What are some exercises that people could be doing if they were to create this gym? Does it always have to be with an existential practitioner? What could people do on their own
No, I
if they
don't
were
think
to go to the existential gym?
no, I don't think it has to be. I don't think it's something that has to be you know, done with someone or guided by someone. In fact, a lot of it shouldn't be guided by someone. But what it might need, of course, are more voices validating validating the the human importance to our well-being, to pause, reflect, to normalize contradiction, to normalize the holding of contradiction, to normalize grappling with something, not as a catastrophe, but as again an important exercise to undertake. And again, you're not setting up camp there. You're not spending your life grappling, but that there are moments where this is okay. And going back to your word, Yannick, of amplification, maybe we need to sort of amplify the necessity for this, but ultimately you want people to be exercising these muscles
Yeah.
on their
So
own.
let's give people some ideas of how they could do that. For example, what I'm already hearing and what you're saying is you could ask yourself questions like, what tensions am I currently sitting with? Or how is my work at the moment, or what I'm doing? It doesn't have to be work, right? How is that aligned or misaligned with what I believe in? Even the act of just asking yourself, what am I experiencing right now? And maybe journaling on describing your experience is an exercising of the reflective muscle.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of reflective career journaling, and I've often suggested to clients to carve out 5 to 15 minutes at the end of a workday, so that you're making space between the end of the workday and other areas of your life. You don't have to labor over these things for an hour, but 5 to 15 minutes. How did I experience this day? How did I experience this day? I mean, again, it forces you to be descriptive. What stood out for me today? What am I walking away with today? Like what's prominent from this day that I'm walking away with? What am I leaving behind, or what am I easily leaving behind? What's challenging as I'm reflecting in this moment? What's challenging to leave behind, and why? Um, you know, I, am I noticing that I'm carrying this in, and quite deliberately I'm literally carrying this into other areas of my life, isn't that interesting? And to look at these things with compassionate curiosity, not for an answer, not to eradicate it or iron it out, but just to go, oh, fascinating. I'm actually carrying this resentment I felt at a meeting today, and I'm holding on to it. And maybe, again, with the compassionate curiosity to also bring some humor into it, ooh, yeah, it does. It feels like I'm carrying this heavy suitcase into other areas of my life. I wonder how that's going to impact other areas of my life. And I mean, these are just some very broad examples, but if you can, to practice. Again, I'm a big proponent on practicing, because we live in a world that wants you to hammer it down and get it right. And I'm going, we're human. Can we not just practice? Can we not just practice
You don't
carving
start
out?
lifting 300 kilos in the gym. You need to step up slowly to it.
Yeah. So practice picking up a few light weights and setting aside, 5 to 15 minutes at the end of the day, and recognize that you're deliberately carving out space between different areas and different experiences in your life. And just say, yeah, how did I experience this day? As I said before, what am I carrying with me? What am I walking away with? Um, what stood out for me? What was really
What has
important? What kind of
felt most
attitude?
valuable?
Yeah.
What has felt most meaningful? Where have I been the most or the least authentic today? What choices, if any, do I regret making? Like,
Yeah.
which
And
ones am I proud of? What is most aligned with how I'd like to be?
how did
I
I
mean,
relate to
there's
others today? If again, if
mm,
if the word authenticity, isn't natural to your tongue, how did I show up and relate to my colleagues today? I mean, you can get quite specific with these questions. What attitude did I walk into at the beginning of the day? Now that I'm looking back on my day, did that attitude shift throughout the day? And what circumstances, or how was I engaged in the day that where that shift occurred? Did I notice when that shift occurred? How did I relate to my colleagues? Did I contribute something today or not? Did I walk into this day carrying things from other areas of my life? And did I put a wall up? And so I wasn't very communicative. I wasn't very open to the day. And now that I've given myself, these few minutes to think about it, I'm not judging these things. Again, I believe strongly in, compassionate curiosity, as opposed to judging it and thinking, "Oh, that wasn't very good," or "Oh, that was wrong." But just, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. I walked into this day very open, and I noticed I noticed the quality of the conversations that I had with my colleagues. That's something that stands out for me. I had some really interesting conversations, or I was just bogged down in this and this and this. And now that I'm reflecting on it, I just built up all these walls, and I don't think I really engaged with anybody today. Um, these things are really interesting, and these are exercises that any of us can practice. We don't have to perfect them, but just practice opening yourself to these kinds of reflections and get as descriptive as possible, so that you can look at those descriptions with some compassionate curiosity, some compassionate fascination with how you navigated the day.
I'm I'm wondering. I'm thinking about Camus' Sisyphus, especially when you mentioned repetitive junk. right? And
Yeah.
zero contribution. And in Albert Camus' Sisyphus, he writes quite powerfully that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Sisyphus as the guy in the Greek mythology that has been condemned to push the
Mhm.
boulder up the hill
Mhm.
only to see it run
Mhm.
down again and then do it all over again,
Mhm.
right? But in Camus' Sisyphus, the act of committing to whatever absurd task is in front of you made it a worthwhile task to engage in just because of the act of commitment.
Mhm.
And that is the way to exist in a quite fulfilled way in an absurd environment with absurd tasks.
Mhm.
And so I I really, if I find myself in that situation where I'm allergic to repetitive junk,
Mhm.
right? So for me, it would be very difficult. And yet I know I have the capacity to actually choose something to be meaningful just because I choose to do it. And I don't wish anybody that kind of career. I wish everybody would have purposeful, legacy contributing careers, but the reality is not everybody's going to have that. And actually, most people are not going to feel this level of engagement. But I know that everybody could, so I'm wondering what other kind of insights from existential philosophy or writings may have found you the way into your practice in some way, because I did mention Camus' Sisyphus to a client of mine, and we had a really interesting conversation about it. It's not often that we talk about philosophical themes or mention specific writers in my coaching, but occasionally some idea just makes it into the room because it just uh, shouts very loudly in my head right now, and it seems to have some merit in it. So I wonder if any kind of existential themes or existential writers or books, ideas make it into your coaching room, and if so, which ones?
Certainly, when you mentioned commitment, my mind immediately went to not a particular person or writing, but just the topic of that is something we don't often speak of. Like, how committed am I to this project, this job? Um, Another existential theme, choices and decisions. We don't often dissect that in and around work and career. What kinds of choice do I have? Where do I not have choice? What kinds of decisions am I making on a daily basis that impact my relationship with work and career? We don't talk about these things very often. We don't delve into we don't dissect them very often. So it's I'm not thinking of a particular theory or writing. I'm thinking just broadly some of the language, some of the existential language, and just how interesting, relevant it is in this particular arena. Um, and again, to encourage clients to think about what these words mean in terms of their everyday. I don't think that answered your question, but that's sort of where my mind is going towards the end of this conversation. That's where my mind is going. Where does I let me ask you, Yannick, where does your mind go? Because I think of these sort of very broad existential words, phrases, terms that we say so easily, and I just immediately am sort of fascinated by their relevance when they're taken up by a client viewing and working on and thinking about their relationship with work and career, and how much, how much room there is for those conversations. But let me ask you, because I think I didn't evade your question. I just didn't answer your question.
Well, first of all, I see that quite a lot. That it started back when my head was in positive psychology, which in some ways it still is. But I noticed that there's many coaches who use specific interventions or specific exercises or specific themes or topics or ways of working specifically from positive psychology, and then other coaches just allowed the field to guide the curiosity, right? So we wouldn't have to do an assessment for different elements of well-being based on a particular model. But if I'm not hearing you talk about meaning or other people or personal growth or a sense of competence or environmental mastery, then I get curious about it. Right. So I think it's similar with existential philosophy. A lot of existential coaches, like, the philosophy never gets named, or the people never get named, the ideas never get named, but the philosophy is inspiring and guiding the way that we are with people and what we invite people to discuss. But that said, to your question, I find that Sartre's ideas about freedom have always inspired me a lot. That there's a lot more than we sometimes would like to admit, a lot more choice that sometimes we like to admit. In a way, it's more comfortable when there is no other choice but to keep going this way that we don't really like. Sometimes it's much more uncomfortable to know that there are choices that we can make. There's a lot of his concept of living in bad faith, kind of denying that you have responsibility and that there are choices, even though it might be a no-brainer not to choose to do that, right? I could quit. Everybody could quit. It might not seem like a possibility because you might feel dependent on the paycheck or the status or the security or the continuity or whatever this job that you came to no longer like offers you. But there are choices, and I'll never forget one client, for example. I was working quite early in my career, who spent 6 sessions thinking through what he could be doing otherwise and how to get out of this building that he couldn't even bear to look at anymore. And then in the end, he chose not to do anything about it. And as a young coach, I was like, oh, because we had just created this wonderful plan, and then he decided, no, I'm not going to do that. It's too much uncertainty. I'd rather stay in the job. But the choice of staying in the job, knowing that you have options, changed the experience quite significantly, right? So that's some of the themes that came in. I often think about Kierkegaard's description of the dizziness of freedom, and it certainly helped me to appreciate limitations more, because I had experienced and not quite recognized as such that having no rules around or no structures to maintain you or to guide you can actually also really be quite a terrifying, or at least anxiety provoking, dizzying experience. Right. So you have that with entrepreneurs or with people who get promoted into positions where all of a sudden they need to organize their team, or consultants that get promoted to higher levels or working towards partners. They need to now basically freelancers under the corporate banner. And but they have all this freedom that nobody's going to look over their shoulder and ask them where the results are. That happens periodically, but there's so much freedom that many jobs have, and that can be a tricky experience.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I agree with you. I guess my response to that, and thank you for sharing that. I suppose in my work with clients, I don't sort of name these things, but we're talking about them
Yeah, makes
all
sense.
the time. Yeah. And it just interesting, going back to choice. I certainly have had clients for sure, where we're laying out the choices, and as we lay them out, the client's like, wow, there's actually a lot of choice there. And it's like, yes, there is a lot of choice, and depending on which direction you choose to go in, can you stand behind that choice? Is that going to be a comfortable choice? Can you stand behind that choice? Because the choosing of from many means abandoning certain options and certain opportunities. How do you feel about that? So, I mean, that's just again a very broad example of delving into the theme of choice, which is an existential theme, or being decisive in our lives, but opening up space to say, yeah, being decisive also has the side to it of letting go of certain things or abandoning certain things. How does that feel? Because if you can stand behind this decision, you can also hold what you've let go of, and do that comfortably. But again, that requires a certain kind of space to play with all of that, and to give the client space to play with it, and talk it out loud, and play with it, and move around the pieces. And yes, the foundation is very existential without naming it as such.
Yeah, and that's why I have it time and again in trainings that so many coaches say, "Oh, I'm already doing that," or "This seems quite natural," or "Oh, now I have language around things that I've done intuitively." So I think a lot of coaches will be very familiar with what we've been talking about, and just not calling it existential when essentially it is. Nobody has to call it as such. It's also a whole nother argument whether this is something that's actually drawing clients in. Right? Because I know there's clients who will definitely get drawn in, and I mean, I have existentialism plastered kind of all over myself.
Mhm.
Uh, Obviously, I'm getting approached more by clients who are more in the career coaching space. They're looking to navigate their careers, but they already recognized the existential themes in it, and willing to explore that. Um, I think with a lot of clients that don't name it as such, and coaches don't have to, right? Even though that's the theme that they're talking about. Which brings me to a question I've kind of held based on something you said earlier around basically the contracting of the work. You said, well, some clients are wondering, well, isn't this like therapy, or isn't this deep sort of reflection? Is this like I came for career coaching? This doesn't, So how do you introduce when somebody's approaching you for career work? Who do they all know already that where your background is, or what your approach is, or how do you invite somebody into this kind of work around careers?
I think it starts with, or I shouldn't say I think, I always have a consultation call, as many coaches and counselors, they do a consultation call, and it's the conversation that takes place in that consultation call that the client themselves, they resonate with something, they recognize something would be important to explore. I'm not dictating what our conversations are going to be. I'm hearing, because first of all, I want to hear what they are experiencing, why they contacted me, what they feel, even though it's an awkward question, but what they hope to potentially, what potentially I could help them with, or guide them on, or support them with. What are their expectations, so that all of that is out in the open. And then I'll talk a little bit about how I approach whatever it is that they've presented. And, you know, that existential foundation will simply come out in our conversation, and it will resonate or it won't. It will, the
Yeah.
client will be curious or they won't, which is fine because some people really do want, you know, a pragmatic, practical, strategic system, a formula, or, you know, depending on what they work on. And others have thought about the idea, yeah, I really need a conversation. I really need to talk this through. And I've often heard people say, I think you're the person I need to speak to. So again, it's, I don't have to, I don't have to blast a particular, you know, theoretical model at clients. It's just a way of opening space and conversing and making room for these areas that clients aren't, they're not able to fully articulate, but they're willing to take a step into it and say, I need to have a conversation about this because it's really affecting my day to day, or it's affecting the way I work. And you know, my also depending on the client, talking about and exposing that layering, not as a formula or not as a like, okay, so here's step one and then step two, but to actually talk about the layering, to normalize, you know, space and time for these kinds of conversations, to talk about how important they are. I think that's where it starts, but ultimately it's the client who runs with that seed. I don't have to say, you know, I follow, you know, so and so's theory of existential analysis to the letter. Not at all. It influences a huge amount of my thinking, but it's, again, it's not a formulaic approach, which, as you know, Yannick, makes it extremely challenging to talk about it, to promote it,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
market it. It's extremely difficult. I mean, how on earth in this day and age of of marketing and, you know, and really tight, you know, tight models of living, how do you throw open the
Yeah.
door and say what's really important is to make time and space for conversation, for creativity, for ambiguity, for contradiction, and to have someone who will be in that space with you and be curious and interested and committed to you and
Yes. And that's
how you are experiencing whatever it is you're experiencing, and that this is important and it is an important layer.
that's where we are right at the last chapter of the conversation, right? And this could have come up at any point. We kind of touched on it, but I remember a colleague of mine sending a screenshot for an advert on Google that was advertising career coaching, and it was an OpenAI advert for ChatGPT as a career coach. And we know from the data that therapy and coaching are the number one use for, I think it was ChatGPT, but it might have been like AI models in general that are open to the public. But this was a new level because it was an actual paid for Google ad for using ChatGPT as a career coach. And that can only be formulaic
Hmm.
and methodological.
Hmm.
And it can definitely have value, but it's missing all of the things that we've just talked about and that you just named so beautifully, right? The engagement, the commitment. Like you could argue that ChatGPT is engaged with you, but it's not committed. It might feel like that if
It's
you're
not
willing to tell
interested
yourself that
in you.
story, but it's not interested. It not it. it doesn't care, right? Because it cannot care.
No, exactly.
And that's a very different experience to have. And also it will ask very different questions to the ones that, to the many that we've opened up around, a deeper sense of self and how do you experience something like that? Because AI doesn't have experience. And so it might learn to inquire about your experience if we were to teach it an existential career coaching method. But it can never
Wouldn't that be
replace
difficult?
actually sitting down with somebody who cares.
We might be immune to AI. It might be very difficult to teach AI. But something you said, Yannick, it makes me think the spontaneity isn't there. And it's that beautiful creativity when I are deeply interested in someone and deeply interested in the conversation, knowing that it could go anywhere. And there's the spontaneity in the client recognizing something, because again, you have offered this space, you have offered this deeply profound layering, or layer of many layers, but this is one. You've offered that, you've opened up this space, and the client also has room, as I've said many times today, to be creative, to explore, to see things from different perspectives, and to spontaneously, come up with something, or go, "Ooh, it makes me feel this way," or I would phrase it this way. And to have a dialogue partner going, "Oh," as I often do, "Oh, what a fabulous phrase, what a fabulous phrase, let's write it down." AI, I'm afraid, or I feel AI is not there. I hope it never gets there, but that's
What a
another
fantastic phrase, is
conversation.
something I could see AI here. I say, what a great question. You're
Oh,
such a genius
oh,
now.
yeah,
But
but
yeah, it has a very
what I,
different quality
yeah,
to it.
yeah, but you know
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I
of
mean.
course,
Yeah,
I do.
it's a very different quality, and it's acknowledging the creative process that the client is in. It's acknowledging and almost celebrating that the client in the conversation, their wheels are spinning, and they're starting to again play with all these components. They're playing with these words and phrases, and going so much further with them, and personalizing them, and becoming committed and grounded in their own lives, not somebody else's, not what is being told. Not they're not on the receiving end of. I mean, we're always on the receiving end of something, but not solely on the receiving end of Chat GPT telling us, how to organize something or do something. It's in that constant, give and take, back and forth, receiving and doing something with it, playing with it, getting creative with it, feeling it, and then
Yeah, I would
pushing something out.
treat it similarly to the what we kind of crudely label those more traditional career counseling, coaching exercises and interventions and methods. I think what a ChatGPT or a Claude or any other AI model who's prompted to offer career coaching can offer is probably really valuable if it's offered at the right time, in the right context. It's just that it cannot do the whole thing, because if it was that simple, people would just kind of move on. And in some ways, I'm sure it does amazing help, and really helps people to just figure something out. But what I see more and more, especially in this age of AI automating a lot of jobs away, is that people need to ask themselves different kinds of questions.
Absolutely.
So I think if these AI tools are being layered onto having conversations about, that create the existential foundation for the work, then I think they can be used at really great results. But it needs to be an extension to the relationship, or it needs to be, or need to be already having worked out the existential foundations, and then you're ready for the tools. So,
Yeah, and I
but I
guess
see a movement. More and more people will need to have those existential conversations. The tools in itself are not going to be enough on their own anymore.
no, and we need to exercise. You've heard me say this often. We need to exercise those
Back to
existential
the
muscles.
existential gym.
The
Yes.
existential gym. I mean, they're ours. Those existential muscles are ours. They're not AIs. They're ours. And we need to continue feeling them, exercising them, experiencing them, using them, learning from them, exploring with them. We have to. We have to.
I couldn't think of any better way to end this conversation unless you can. Is there something that you want to offer to coaches listening to this, or something that might capture something that we haven't talked about, or summarizes something that you really want people to leave with?
It's not. I'm thinking not so much of offering something. I'm curious. I'm curious to know, and I hope people who are listening to this. I hope that you will add some dialogue or commentary. I'm fascinated to know what in our conversation today resonated with you, sparked some further curiosity, made you think about the way you work differently, got some creative juices going, and what are they? This is it's not so much what I want to leave listeners with. It's I'm inviting listeners. Please share with me. What did you hold on to? What did you gravitate towards? Again, was it a word, a phrase? Was it part of our conversation? What did you grab onto and run with? And what are you thinking about? What are you thinking about now? And are you bringing different perspectives? Are you already starting to bring different perspectives into these conversations that you have with your clients? And I'd love to know what people think of the existential gym.
And I would just add, if you are listening to this and you already consider yourself an existential career coach, or you're a career coach who resonates deeply with all of these themes, whether you call them existential or not, I just love to know who you are.
Yes, exactly.
Because I think
Exactly.
there's a lot of scope for getting a group of people together who believe in the necessity of offering existential spaces to people who are navigating careers.
Please.
And
Yes.
I think it will be in extremely high demand as we move further into this age of AI, and people will need to navigate what it's like to be human, and what that means, and what you can contribute. And
Yeah,
there's all of these questions that are fascinating conversations, but also I would like to call some of us together and see what we might do with
absolutely.
that, if there's some way to amplify these voices even more.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, it's an open invitation to, please get in touch, share the work that you do. Tell us if you're interested in further conversations about, Yannick, and I know we're at the end of our time, but just very briefly, I'm fascinated by what I call the third voice in the session room, which is AI. And there are many voices that are in a session. The world comes in, and we also represent the world and multiple contexts. But there's suddenly AI is now a third party in conversations, and I'd love to know from people listening what's happening in your practices. How are you reacting to it or not reacting to it? How are you incorporating it, resisting it, getting quite testy with it? What's your relationship with this third voice? And absolutely, for those who might be interested in further conversations, the existential gym would love to hear your experiences. That's my it's not an offering. It's a please share
Great.
share with me. Yeah.
So there might be a comment section where you are listening to this or watching this. You could also drop me an email, 42@existential.coach. Britt-Mari, if people wanted to step closer into your sphere, I know you're writing. Where can people learn from you if they wanted to get in touch with you or just
Yeah,
step into your space?
Yeah, you can reach me directly by email. I love getting messages from people and starting conversations. So Britt-Mari, Brittmari, at mycareercanvas.co. Co.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Britt-Mari, it's been such a pleasure. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad we've made it, and I'm hoping that I know that people will find value in this. And let's see where this goes.
Let's see
I
where
know
this goes.
we're in each other's world, so
Mhm.
I thank you so much for making time and for being that voice that is worth amplifying. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Yannick. I always enjoy our conversations immensely, and I really appreciate you making time for this conversation. And yes, let's see what we can amplify. Thank
Brilliant.
you.